Resident Evil 3 is the biggest disappointment I've had in a long, long time. Merely a year ago, Resident Evil 2 Remake set the gold standard for action survival horror games and how to properly reimagine and recreate a classic game. It was a remarkable experience that was terrifying from beginning to end, creating many of those moments organically through its haunting, explorable environments, its willingness to challenge the player, its photorealistic visuals that made you feel like you were truly roaming the creepy and often bloody halls of the Raccoon City Police Department. And of course, with the introduction of the Tyrant, a hulking Terminator-like enemy that constantly followed you everywhere. Resident Evil 2 was a high-pressure, high-anxiety experience because it created difficult situations where you were constantly on your toes, where you constantly had to think about how many resources you had and figure out the best way to use those resources. It was a game where I found myself constantly asking myself, why the fuck are you putting yourself through this pain? Resident Evil 2 was a game unlike anything else. Resident Evil 3 is none of that. It lacks the soul that its predecessor had and creates a game that's hollow and empty. Resident Evil 3 is often a boring, mundane game. Resident Evil 3 doesn't do anything interesting with its environments, its enemies, or its story. It fails to put you in any interesting situations where you have the freedom to tackle those situations in any way you want. And speaking of freedom, there's no freedom when it comes to exploring the world around you. Oftentimes, the game funnels you from point A to point B with no room to deviate from that path. Past Resident Evil games have had a lot of emphasis on exploration, but this game doesn't stick to that ideology. There are multiple times where there is the illusion of exploration. You might be walking towards point B, and along the way you'll find this one small room you can go in and pick up a collectible, or an ammo box, or some herbs. Exploration is an afterthought in Resident Evil 3 because the environments are so incredibly linear and lack any real incentive for why you should take the time to explore in the very few cases that it does open up in the most uninspired ways. When Capcom announced Resident Evil 3, they were very vocal about it being a more action-y entry to the series. However, I think they forgot how to properly create an action-adventure game that was actually willing to challenge the player and trust that they were smart enough to learn the tools they were given, while also pacing the rate at which they receive items and resources. The sign of any true action game, or any good game for that matter, is the ramp up to power, making the player feel powerful the more time goes on, and the more they invest in learning how the mechanics work. In God of War, Kratos starts with only an axe and his shield at his disposal, but at the end, spoilers, he's using his chains of chaos and comboing them together with his axe while using his magic and Atreus' abilities at the same time. In Control, Jessie starts with only a pistol and her telekinesis, but at the end, spoilers again, she's dashing from cover to cover, hurling giant boulders at her enemies while fucking flying! These are games that pace out what the player can and can't do, creating more and more challenging situations that test everything the player has learned so far. Resident Evil 3 blows their load from its opening moments. It gives too much power to the player and it hinders every aspect of the game. I never felt in danger, I never felt anxious, I never felt scared because there was no reason to. The game gives too many resources for anything to feel tense or scary or meaningful. Ammo is a precious commodity in past entries of Resident Evil. Here, they're everywhere as if they're going out of style. I shit you not, 30 minutes into my playthrough, I already had 50 bullets. Every encounter I had felt pointless. There was no reason to make my shots count, no decision making needed on my part as to whether or not using my ammo was the best course of action. There were no stakes at all. I didn't have to think about anything. And much like how I would find ammo everywhere, heals were abundant too. I didn't care if I slipped up once or twice during a fight because I had an inventory full of first aid spray and herbs all ready to go. There's no strategy or any decision making involved in the game's combat, and it's heartbreaking because it forgets what makes Resident Evil, well, Resident Evil. The biggest disappointment of the game is the Nemesis, and it's a shame how much of a joke he is compared to the Tyrant in Resident Evil 2. A lot of the scariest and tense moments from Resident Evil 2 were because of the Tyrant. Here was this lumbering behemoth that actively roamed the world you were exploring and made completing any objective just a little bit harder. He would follow you everywhere, push zombies that were in his way, and do anything to kill you. The best part about him, and the way he worked, was that everything he did was organic. None of the moments that happened to me were scripted. What sucks is that the Nemesis is the complete opposite of that, and serves more as an annoyance than an interesting mechanic. His appearances are solely scripted, only appearing when the story needs him to, or once a player reaches a certain point in the world. And when he does show up, there's no real challenge. Yeah, he has the ability to jump in front of you and cut your path off, as well as being able to pull you towards him using his tendrils, but none of those things happen with enough frequency that it makes anything more interesting or more tense or scary. What made the Tyrant so menacing was that he was able to go in any room you were in, except the save rooms, of course. But that's where some of the challenge of the game came from, him being able to chase you everywhere and constantly keep you on your feet. In Resident Evil 3, the Nemesis stops and stares at you through a window! Like, come on! Don't just stand there, do something!
He's just standing there, menacingly!
What's worse is that he eventually just becomes different types of bosses. And these bosses are terrible to say the least. Because great boss battles give players ample room to move in, and a level of creativity as to how to take them down. There's drama and something grandiose about them. Here, it's all about going around a few piles of wood and shooting him in his weak spot. Cool. That's so much fun. What's worse is that Resident Evil 3 doesn't feel like a full product. For $60 you get 5 hours worth of content in its campaign, and yeah, there is a multiplayer component attached to it, but it's so uninspired and boring that I barely played it. For a game that's $60, a 5-hour mediocre experience with an even worse multiplayer component to it isn't worth it to me. The only upside that I can think of when it comes to Resident Evil 3 is that it's a fucking gorgeous game. The visuals are insane, it's crazy to see how much detail there is in the environments, how the lighting is some of the best in the business, and how incredibly detailed the characters are. The graphics are truly unlike anything else right now. It's probably the prettiest game I've seen, actually, in a while. The sound design is great too. I could hear gunshots and screams coming from blocks away, and I could hear the zombies' feigned footsteps whenever... And I will be really honest, I actually really love Jill Valentine and Carlos Oliveira and their cheesy ass writing, but it's because I like the fact that their dialogue is written like a B-grade action movie. Other than that though, Resident Evil 3 doesn't have much going for it, and it's a shame because I wanted it to be great, but it often feels as if this was meant to be a DLC for Resident Evil 2, rather than a full-fledged retail product. The final verdict for this game is 2 dead zombies out of 5.